Every war has two stories. The one they told you, and the one they buried. The files are now open. In 1944, the United States Army recruited 1,100 artists, designers, actors, and sound engineers. It handed them inflatable tanks, giant speakers, and fake radio equipment, and sent them to the front lines of World War II. Their mission: make the German army believe an entire fake army was real. No real weapons, no real tanks, just rubber, paint, and the biggest con in military history. And it worked. This is the story of the Ghost Army, the most creative unit that ever went to war. To understand how this happened, you have to understand the problem the Allies were facing. By 1944, the war in Europe had become a war of information. Both sides were desperate to know one thing about the other. Where is your army, and how strong is it? Whoever guessed wrong lost thousands of men in an afternoon. Deception had already proven its worth. In the deserts of North Africa, the British had pioneered the art of military illusion. Stage magicians, set designers, and camouflage experts built entire dummy armies out of plywood and canvas. At the Battle of El Alamein, they disguised real tanks as trucks and built fake tanks where there were none. And they fooled Rommel, one of the most brilliant commanders of the war, about exactly where the attack would fall. The Americans were watching, and as they planned the invasion of Europe, they realized they needed their own unit dedicated entirely to deception. So in early 1944, they created something that had never existed in the U.S. military: the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. On paper, it was a small combat unit. In reality, it was a traveling roadshow of illusion, 1,100 men strong. But here's what made it extraordinary. The Army didn't recruit hardened infantry. It went to art schools, to advertising agencies, to design firms and Hollywood studios. It pulled in painters, illustrators, set designers, audio engineers, and actors. Men who, in civilian life, made magazine covers and window displays, not war. Among them were names that would shape American culture. Bill Blass, who would become one of the most famous fashion designers in the world. Ellsworth Kelly, who would become a giant of modern art, his paintings hanging in museums across the planet. Art Kane, a future legend of photography. These weren't soldiers who happened to be creative. They were creative professionals who happened to become soldiers. But this wasn't an art project. These men were going to the front lines. And if the Germans figured out the deception, every single one of them would be dead, along with thousands of real soldiers who were counting on the illusion to hold. The Ghost Army fought with 4 weapons. Not one of them could kill a man. Together, they could move the German army across a map. The first weapon was visual deception: inflatable tanks, trucks, jeeps, artillery pieces, and even aircraft, all made of rubber and canvas, inflated with air compressors. From 200 yards away, through a pair of binoculars or the lens of a reconnaissance camera, they looked completely, perfectly real. A handful of men could inflate an entire armored division in under an hour. But the Ghost Army went further. They pressed fake tank tracks into the mud with special rollers. They lit cooking fires. They hung laundry between vehicles. They turned an empty field into a living, breathing military camp, down to the last convincing detail. The second weapon was sonic deception, and it was genuinely ahead of its time. Engineers from Bell Labs, the most advanced sound laboratory in America, recorded the actual sounds of armored and infantry units: tank engines turning over, bridges being built, men shouting, trucks grinding through gears. They mixed these recordings into seamless audio programs, then blasted them across the countryside through 500-pound speakers mounted on half-tracks. On a still night, those speakers could be heard 15 miles away. German listening posts in the dark would hear an entire division rolling into position when there was nothing out there but sound. The third weapon was radio deception. Every real military unit has a unique radio fingerprint: the rhythm of its messages, its call signs, the personal style of its operators tapping out Morse code. The Ghost Army's radio men studied real units until they could imitate them perfectly, then took their place on the airwaves. To German intelligence listening in, An entire division seemed to be exactly where the radio said it was, even when those men had moved miles away. The fourth weapon was the most human. They called it atmosphere. Ghost Army soldiers became actors playing real units. They sewed on the patches of other divisions. They painted false markings on their jeeps. They impersonated officers, and they drove into local towns and cafes to be overheard, deliberately leaking false plans to anyone who might be listening. They were performing in the most dangerous theater on Earth, where a blown line could get them killed. So how well did it actually work? Over the next year, the Ghost Army would deploy more than 20 times across France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and Germany, and the Germans fell for it nearly every single time. Their first major test came just after D-Day. In Normandy, the Ghost Army staged a fake buildup of forces to pull German attention away from the real Allied advance, learning their craft under live fire on the most contested ground in the world. Then came Luxembourg, September 1944, an operation called Bettenburg, and this is where the stakes become clear. The Ghost Army was ordered to impersonate the 6th Armored Division and hold a stretch of the front line. The problem was that the line had a dangerous gap, and there was no real division to fill it. So 1,100 men with rubber tanks and loudspeakers pretended to be a force of thousands. For a week, they bluffed the German army into believing a powerful armored division stood in their path. If the Germans had called that bluff and attacked in force, the Ghost Army had almost nothing to fight back with. They held the line with an illusion, and the danger was never fake. Ghost Army positions sat well within German artillery range. They were shelled. They took real casualties. Men died maintaining the lie. Their masterpiece came at the very end of the war. March 1945, Operation Viersen, the crossing of the Rhine River, the last great natural barrier into the heart of Germany. The Ghost Army built an entire fake river crossing at one location. Inflatable boats, the recorded sounds of engines and bridge construction, fake radio traffic coordinating a phantom assault. They convinced the German defenders that the main attack was coming there, and the Germans massed their forces to stop it. Meanwhile, the real crossing went in 10 miles away, against far lighter resistance than anyone expected. That single deception is estimated to have saved thousands of Allied lives. The Ghost Army fought in the biggest war in human history, and their most powerful weapon was a lie. But the most incredible part? Nobody was allowed to know about it for the next 4 decades. When the war ended, the Ghost Army was sworn to silence. The entire unit was classified. The men who had pulled off the greatest deception of the war were ordered to tell no one. Not their wives, not their children, not their closest friends, and they obeyed. For more than 40 years, 1,100 men carried this secret. They sat through dinners while relatives wondered what they'd really done in the war. Many of them died with the story still locked inside, never recognized, never thanked. The truth only began to surface in the 1980s and 1990s, as the old documents were finally declassified. In 2013, a public television documentary brought the Ghost Army to a wide audience for the first time, and the world started to understand what these men had done. Then in 2022, 77 years after the war ended, Congress awarded the Ghost Army the Congressional Gold Medal, the nation's highest civilian honor. By then, only a handful of the original members were still alive to receive it. The unit built to be invisible had finally been seen, just as nearly all of its ghosts had gone. The Ghost Army proved something the rest of the military took decades to fully accept. That creativity is a weapon, that a well-told lie can be worth more than a tank battalion. 1,100 artists went to war with rubber and sound and paint. They fought more than 20 engagements. They took real casualties, and they never once let the illusion break. They were artists who became soldiers, soldiers who became ghosts, and ghosts who saved more lives than most combat divisions ever did. The Army buried their story for 40 years. We just dug it up. If this blew your mind, drop a comment with the craziest military deception you've ever heard of. Subscribe and hit the bell so you don't miss the next file we crack open. The files are now open.